Hey guys, welcome to the Brand's podcast. And in this video, it's gonna be a little bit different as we invite a family member to join us from France. He's gonna share with us his experience in life situations and his experience also here and abroad. Welcome, Mr. Jaffar.
Hello, Zaki. Thanks for inviting me into your podcast.
So now I have a couple of questions for you. I want to start with you telling us about your childhood and who is Jaffar Ben Chico really. We only saw pictures and heard stories, but we wanted to hear it from you personally.
I am the oldest son of Mostafa and Madeleine, a mixed couple. My dad and my mom had different religion and cultures, but they grew up in the same neighborhood, the Medina of Constantine, at the time of the French colonial rule of Algeria, and shared essential human values. I can also say that I am the natural son of the French colonization of Algeria. Growing up during the Algerian Independence War, I felt the shear line, this dividing line, pass through my own body. Cultural, linguistic, and religious dividing lines passing through your body can be painful, but they also made me a better person, I think. They made me a good listener, tolerant and conscious of a common good, conscious of the need to fight all sorts of prejudices. They also made me discover early in life that following a crowd may not be the best path, in particular when strong emotions and impulses are involved. I am not a panurship. I am not a lemming. I march to my own drummer. I am also partisan of the law of least effort, and this keeps my mind sharp, as I am always seeking improvements, if possible long-term improvements, even if this necessitates more work in the short term.
Well, the second question is how did the young generation back then spend their youth? I mean, it's kind of different from now, but I'm sure you can tell us a little bit about that.
My family was comfortable financially. Thanks to the craft production of tobacco products my grandfather Said had developed with his brother Salah, and the subsequent excellent management of the growing enterprise by first Salah's son Abdel Krim and thereafter Said's son Omar. My dad Mostafa, the youngest of Said's children, one day discovered tennis and soon became involved in its administering and sponsoring aspects. In 1947, he was elected president of the Regional League of Tennis and stayed in that post until 1962, when he set up the Algerian Federation of Tennis and was elected its first president. He also organized and sponsored the Ben Chico Cup, a competition between clubs. So, unsurprisingly, a large part of my free time turned around tennis, practicing, playing in meetings at times, or most often simply traveling with my family to tennis events in Sétif, Batna, Soukaras, Annaba, Tunis, Algiers, Oran, or even Milan and Paris. My teenager years were during the Algerian War of Independence. My classmates were in majority French. Same thing on the tennis courts or on the athletic track and fields when I started to train in sprint running. In those years, you had to be careful about what you say and hide your true feeling on the French colonial rule of Algeria. I had a few comrades and friends, but none with whom I could really open up. My dad bought me a small motorbike as soon as I could legally ride it. So I enjoyed riding it alone in the neighborhood or in the nearby rural roads. The last year before independence, my first cousin Karoum became my classmate in the lycée. He had a good scooter and we started to do these pleasure rides together.
We have something in common that I noticed when I saw your website. You love the sea and you have many adventures and stories to tell. Can you tell us a little bit also about that?
My first memory of the sea was the beach at Skikda. My favorite childhood readings were adventure in the wilderness, in the air, or at sea. One day in Algiers, my parents let me purchase a spare gun. And I started spear fishing in Surcouf, where our family had a villa. I never learned to dive deep, but I enjoyed spear fishing for many years. And I am proud of having traced the path for my younger brother, Nadir, who later would reach a high level in international spearfishing competitions and would become secretary of the Algerian Spearfishing Federation. In my youth, I used to read a lot about sailboats and the sea, but my actual outings on sailboats were few and far between. In 1984, with my wife Françoise, we decided to rent a sailboat in a 2-week-long flotilla sailing program in Greece with our 3 kids. We had tested the formula 2 years earlier without our kids, and my sailing experience had improved. The flotilla sailing program has about a dozen boats sailing together, and in VHF radio contact with a larger boat of a flotilla skipper for assistance if and when needed. We also had in the program a few days of free sailing away from the rest of the flotilla the second week. And as we had a windsurfing board on board with us, I decided to spend these days mostly anchored inside the flooded crater of an ancient volcano for practicing windsurfing in a protected environment. At the end of the period, we had to return to our rendezvous point with the rest of the flotilla. I prepared my route on the map, knowing that we had to pass through a 300-meter wide pass, rocky pass between 2 islands, about 20 kilometers away. It was quite simple on the paper. So we set sail under Genoa, full main, and gentle winds. But as soon as we exited the crater, I noticed a beam on my right, a mass of bad clouds. With my greater experience now, I know that I reacted too late and too weakly, too slowly also. Observing the approaching clouds for too long. When it became obvious that this was no good, I called for my daughter, who was 14 at the time, to reef the main. We were at beam reach with the Genoa properly trimmed and the mainsail almost all the way down in the cockpit, when a violent gust of wind struck us. I know now that I should have been more attentive to the warning signs, but I was not. The boat heeled strongly, and I jumped forward to release the Genoa sheet with my left hand while steering the boat with my right hand. The boat came back up So I instructed everybody to go down in the cabin to put life jackets on. Heavy rain arrived almost simultaneously. So heavy that the sea around us became white because of the impact of these big drops of rain. The 27-foot-long boat was at high speed, pulled at broad reach by the full Genoa flapping in the wind. My 11-year-old son came back on deck with his life jacket on to ask me, "Papa, are we going to die?" I answered as clearly as I could, "No," while maintaining the proper bearing on the compass, as the visibility under the heavy rainstorm was reduced to a few boat lengths. I had lost track of time and distance, and the rocks could appear at any time now. I tried several times to furl the Genoa on its roller furling, but failed. The furling line appeared stuck. I could have tried to use one winch to force the reluctant furling mechanism, but instead selected to focus on keeping the boat on its proper bearing, compass bearing, as my mind was focused on the narrow rocky pass ahead. Also, as an alternative, I didn't have enough free water to run with the wind on my left. The narrow rocky pass was our best bet, even at high speed. I focused on steering the boat to the proper compass bearing. The Genoa, flapping freely in the strong wind like a flag, started to tear itself apart, and we could see small pieces of the Genoa going away, carried away from us on our left. After what appeared to be an eternity, the rain and the wind eased and visibility returned. We were a couple 100 meters away from the rocks, but right on the best course for the middle of the pass, right where I wanted to be. The wind eased much more as soon as we reached the lee of the island on our right. With weaker winds, we succeeded in roller reefing the Genoa while I started the engine. The mainsail was still lowered on the cockpit floor. We were all happy and relieved. We called the flotilla skipper on the VHF and reported the incident and our condition. We motor-sailed the rest of the way to the rendezvous point and calmly arrived at the small dock where the rest of the flotilla was awaiting us, anxious to hear the detail of our story.